Hi, everyone. Welcome. Hi there, Marianne. I should be able to get you over as a panelist. And Marianne's going to help us with the Q&A. Welcome, everyone. We'll be starting in a moment. Thanks for joining early. We'll be recording and sharing this session with you all, as well as a copy of the slide deck. So thanks for joining. Thanks for joining, everyone. We'll be beginning in a moment. All right. Hi, welcome, Marianne.
Make sure you record, Tom.
Yeah, it is automatically. So it's got me covered, Jonathan. It knows. All right. And can you guys see the screen, the share?
Yes.
Excellent.
All good. All good.
All right. Well, we are at the top of the hour, so we'll begin. We have a lot to cover today. Very excited to introduce our 2025 Value Automation Buyer's Guide. And this webinar is to celebrate that launch. And to do that, we've invited two very, very special guests with us today. The first is Jonathan Keighley. He's the managing director of Finesse, and Finesse is a value management and automation platform. And it has been around for quite a while. It is one of the legacy solutions that have been very popular with many, many value consultants and sellers. And Jonathan is joining us from the UK today. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thanks, Tom. It's great to be here. Great to be invited in this session. So, looking forward to the discussions and the presentation. Great.
Absolute honor to have you, and can't wait for you to share some of the experience that you've learned over these past several decades of running Finesse and working with just some amazing organizations. And we have from San Francisco, Max Elster joining us. He's the CEO and co-founder of Minoa. Minoa is a more recent value automation platform provider and is representing kind of the innovation that we're seeing in the space, and can't wait to dig into some of that with Max. Max, welcome.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks for the invite, and very excited for the session.
Now, that accent is not from the UK, and it's definitely not from San Francisco. Where are you originally from, Max?
I'm originally from a small village close to Cologne in Germany, actually, and moved out to the Bay a couple of years ago.
Awesome. Well, welcome. Welcome to the Bay Area in the States. And I'm Tom Pacello. If you don't know me, I'm better known as the ROI guy, co-founder partner of Genius Drive. I have been very active in the value automation space for years, for the past 30 years, creating one of the first companies in the space ever, a company called Interpose, that we built TCO value models, worked with Microsoft a lot, and I sold that company to Gartner Group way, way, way back when, and then created a more recent company, Alineian, which was sold to Mediafly. So very familiar with value automation space, but now just consulting and kind of adding value around all of these amazing software platforms and innovators in the space. So what I'd love to do is let's dive in and start to talk a little bit first about the need for this, right? When we look at selling today, it is difficult. There's a lot of uncertainty out there, and that shows in the metrics. These from Gartner are really important. More than 50% of buying efforts, they're not lost to the competition. They're instead lost to no decision. And so we see a lot of buying journeys that are canceled, and those that aren't canceled are substantially delayed. And so that's really causing a lot of pipeline issues and pipeline stress in many of the organizations we talk to. Then, if a deal does get closed, there's discounts applied. 20% is the number Gartner reports, but we're hearing reports much larger than that of having to reduce price in order to win the deal or win the renewal. And then the big thing is that renewals are dramatically at risk. Wrote a couple articles about this recently. There's a lot of organizations that are looking for replacements, looking to consolidate solutions. And unfortunately, there's a lot of regret. 2/3 of buyers regret the purchase almost before the ink is dry. So Max, I'll throw it over to you. What changes in demand is this creating for value programs and automation?
Yeah, I mean, the metric kind of speak for itself, right? I think there's been a lot of whirlwind in the category of software in the last couple of years. I think when you look at just overall statistics, growth rates, they are basically cut in half. Like it's, I think, the lowest since a decade, right? Like a lot of companies are, especially the public ones, and then it kind of filters down to the private companies. Everybody is stuck in that kind of insecurity of like, who do they sell to? Why are buyers not buying, right? And I think there's a lot of kind of second order consequences on that. And I think one of the big ones is that more and more companies are prioritizing the aspect of value to compensate with that, right? And actually go against the trend of growth getting cut in half, and actually work towards it by helping your sales, but also then your customer success team understand where they can cover value, where they can position value in the right way, but then also how do they actually find the right budget holes within an organization to renew, but then also to upsell and cross-sell. I think a lot of it is kind of coming from, I think, a strategic trend in the market of where organizations are currently struggling with, which is growth rates, and everybody loves to still grow. I think that has changed, and value programs are the answer to basically cope with that overall market problem that we're seeing.
Yeah.
Jonathan, yeah, what are you seeing?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with Max. Just to add to that, I think as the world becomes more stable from an economy perspective, your discretionary spend across departments becomes less and less, and therefore it becomes incumbent upon boards and senior management teams to approve that budget, and therefore that requires business cases on ROI and value engagement. And therefore, that in parallel is actually increasing demand for automation in this world. So, yeah.
And Jonathan, I know we're seeing these programs start earlier at many organizations. And I think there's another trend that you had highlighted in a discussion that we had of folks going from kind of the big companies who are value leaders down to the small. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, the larger organizations, I think, that have historically held huge value engineering teams have almost had huge resources, benchmark information, teams to build mega tools to deploy large sales teams for big deals. When this resource type moves into smaller organizations, there's not that infrastructure available for them to develop the tools at scale. So I think early adopters need tools that can be developed at scale, where you have full flexibility, but yet have the drive to bring together the value engineering expertise they've learned and gleaned from those large organizations into the smaller entities. And these smaller organizations, the small to mid-sized organizations doing 10, 15, 20 grand deals, they still need a business case. So, yeah.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing it much earlier stage wise, where before you might not have kind of built a value program till Series D, or public companies, it was reserved way back in the day to IBM, SAP, Oracle, those firms. Certainly moved kind of midstream into the midstream SaaS companies like the Workdays, the Splunks. But now it seems like every company, the second they've got, even a handful of sellers, is wanting to transition from that product-led growth to value-led growth.
Yeah.
And you can't do it the same way that you do it in the large organizations. So
Yeah.
very well pointed out. What a buyer wants, what a buyer needs, business value. And I'd like to, Gartner points out 3 key factors to buyers saying yes. So getting over that no decision hump, but just getting over that hump isn't enough. You really have to have it be a high value deal, a deal where the sentiment is strong. And so you can do the growth within that account. You can do the renewal. And these were the 3 factors they identified. Jonathan, how do you think, value can help with delivering on these 3 key elements to a successful deal?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. It's a great question. I think it's unemotional. I think the ROI value proposition takes the emotion out of that discussion and that decision for an organization. And, it drives the requirement for organizations today to address probably 4 or 5 points, I think. One is, why should we spend at all? And that goes back to that first slide. I think the do nothing is our biggest competitor. Why spend now? Why should we spend the budget now rather than in 12 months' time? And if I want to spend now, have I got the funds to spend? That's the affordability piece, affordability piece. That brings together and to bear what the value truly delivers. Can we afford this? Is it wealth that we are, uncovering, and can we drive that value to bring our wealth back? And also the differentiation piece for suppliers, and that is, why should I spend with that supplier? So those 4 key concepts, I think value, engagement addresses all of those collectively.
Max, particularly understand my business and situation is becoming really important, and you've got to start delivering value right away. No one wants a sales pitch. What are you seeing?
I mean, the last one is the last sentence you brought up is important, right? Nobody wants to see a sales pitch anymore. I think it comes back a little bit to the conversation and the data that buyers are more prepared than ever, right? When they enter a conversation with a salesperson, and what does it actually mean, right? They've probably seen a demo of your product already. They've understand what are the key functionality, right? They come into a meeting and they are much more prepared than 10 years ago. And I think there's different data points. So Gartner, Winning by Design, and others that kind of basically support that initiative. And I think what's interesting now is, what are the expectations, right? They come into a meeting and they want to understand, how do you differentiate, as Jonathan mentioned nicely, but then also, where do you deliver value, and what is the customer stories that you can tell that actually are very similar to mine? So it comes not just a conversation of value as kind of this one-way street. It becomes a conversation of value relative to other customers you've worked with, and or do the stories actually resonate with my problem and the initiatives that I'm trying to enforce? And if you're not really if you don't have the capabilities to basically leverage that and understand how customer stories relate to the situation of your customer, it's going to be an issue, right? And I think that's where value automation helps, because you can essentially equip every single person within an organization to have those stories, but then also the value narrative in mind, presentable to a customer.
And Max, I think the important thing here is that, the value is traditionally kind of in that middle bucket, collaborate on my outcomes and value. And we're seeing this value motion where it needs to go with understand my business and situation and move earlier in the process, as well as driving confidence in the decision. So I think the imperative of value is not just to come up with the number, but to help with all 3 of these key elements. I do want to highlight Marian DeSimone is with us. Hi, Marian. Marian is a value superstar for Genius Drive, and a very experienced value leader. I got to meet Marian way back in the day at Microsoft, and have enjoyed working with her and collaborating with her. She's managing our chat, and she'll be sharing some documents with you. She'll be adding some anecdotes. So please don't be afraid to chat, ask questions. We are going to take Q&A later in the session. So Marian is kind of addressing all of that. Now, we know that value is needed, and value definitely delivers, but we've seen still, to my chagrin, and I'm sure both of you all, sometimes there's adoption issues. Our research shows less than, 1 in 5 sales folks adopt it, less than 1 in 10 customer success adoption, which we'll talk about in a little bit about the risks there. Why, first of all, such low adoption? And I'll start with you, Max, and what can we do to kind of get better success and overcome this adoption challenge?
It's a fantastic question. I think very much speaks to kind of some of the first slides we had, right? Of the market is changing, value teams have to somewhat adapt to that change, and they have to think about scale. I think that the biggest reason that I've been kind of observing a little bit of the history of value engineering is that traditionally it's been pretty perpetual, right? You had this concept of sell it, service, and then you basically leave it, right? And you leave the customer by themselves. And of course, selling it initially, that's where value made sense. And you had dedicated value teams and value engineers and consultants that were supporting on that initiative. I think what we've been realizing is more and more over the last couple of years is that value teams have often been very much isolated from the rest of the go-to-market team, which that's going to make it harder for them to actually access the rest of the organization. That's when they miss the right authority to actually deliver the outcomes they want to achieve, right? To also advance their personal career. And I think now it's a little bit turned on its head, where they are empowered by go-to-market leaders, chief revenue officers, chief customer officers to take control, but also the initiative to think about scale. And scale is the answer, right? I think for every successful go-to-market tool that exists out there, they've always been very good at scaling and making it easy for sellers to adopt it. And that's not just on the pre-sale side, but also on the post-sale side, right? That's when the tools like Gong and Gainsight and many of the others have been incredibly successful with the work they've done. And I think that's where value is finally coming to a place now where not just the value teams, but also the executives think about scale as kind of the core element of value. And I think that's now where adoption is just changing into a different era now, because the fundamentals and the beliefs are changing of where value needs to be integrated. And that's a great change that I think we're all trying to evangelize. And I think it's happening more and more across different organizations.
Yeah.
Jonathan?
Yeah, great comments, Max. I completely agree with those. I think there also needs to be a mandate from senior management for those teams to support and underpin that process for the sales teams to do this. It clearly is an imperative for any salesperson to actually discover and understand the business that they're selling into and what their solution and products will help them achieve. Will help them generate some revenue, will help them save some money. And I think that's absolutely critical. And I think with the growth of sales methodologies, particularly new ones like MEDDPICC, for instance, it's incumbent upon a sales rep without the need of a pre-sales person. Because remember, back in the days, 10, 20, 30 years ago, the sales guy would turn up with the pre-sales technical expert and they would do all the talking and the sales guy would close it. That's gone now. And I think that's probably what happened 5 years ago when there was an increased number of value engineers that almost were supporting those deals, those large deals, purely on value. And some of the sales reps were left high and dry. And now it really is up to the salespeople to drive that value themselves directly with customers. And that's going to be mandated by the senior leadership team in sales, CROs, and those teams. Yeah.
Yeah. Jonathan, we saw, in the past, it was very reliant on a VC group to deliver this, a value consulting, value engineering group. That then transitioned to say, hey, let's give self-service to the salespeople, the customer success folks. But you can't just build a tool, give it to them, and then have them succeed. It takes a lot. Executive leadership was a key element that we found was essential in the research that kind of identified these numbers. Having great value content and a foundation of a story and a hymnal so that everyone had that kind of foundation was important. Training, enablement, coaching, practice can't be underestimated. And then a lot of organizations cut back so much on their value consultants and engineers, and then they wonder why sales won't adopt when we don't have, the folks that are out there to ultimately support them. And you can't have sellers and customer success in particular that are ultimately unsupported. And I think that takes us to the next question, which is, value engineering and consulting. That role has changed. Jonathan, talk about this a little bit and where you see us today and then kind of where you see us going.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think those value engineering teams that have almost built up their own IP, their own expertise, obviously that cannot be lost. And I think for those teams and those leaders to enable the sellers, they're the guys that are crunching through the detailed business cases. They're the guys doing the templates, the samples, the demonstrations around value. And it's for them to lead then the sales guys down that road of selling on value.
Mhm.
So enablement is absolutely key, and for those value engineers to teach and to educate those users, those sellers, to understand this actually can be fairly simple. This can be a straightforward and not a complex situation to talk about the value and the ROI. So I think on top of that, you need those evangelists there to say, this is how customers buy. This is how a board makes decisions. This is how senior management have got to report to the board. They're the guardians of the galaxy. They need to know what it is in terms of payback, because 9 times out of 10, these organizations are making decisions based on that and not on product, not on solution, not on features or functions and the technical piece. Although it's very important, that's not what they're making a decision on. It's saying, do we have a payback? Do we have an NPV? I think those are critical pieces, although not exclusively, they are critical pieces of the value engagement.
Yeah, Max, what are you seeing on the VC trends?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of the combination of all of them, and I totally agree with Jonathan. It's a combination of, I mean, of the different elements. I sometimes, when I recognize my own former product background, I sometimes say that basically the value teams are somewhat like the product manager for value,
Hmm.
where good product managers do, right? They assess challenges and problems on the product. They try to brainstorm with the right team members on what are the solutions, and then actually evangelize those solutions to internal folks, to customers, and to the larger market, and then also do that with the executives, right? And I think we do see that more and more value teams become those product managers for value, where they are trying to understand strategically where is the organization lacking when it comes to value across the different functions and the different teams. What are the potential solutions to actually help them improve it, right? But then also, more importantly, and that's one thing that you mentioned here with evangelization, that's an important element of every value person within every company, that they evangelize the solutions that they're bringing into the market, that they're bringing into their internal teams. And I think that's where it feels like there's a lot of overlap with kind of even my personal history and how I think value teams are kind of accommodating all of those different themes and responsibilities. And I think the role of AI is probably going to bring that even further by having a lot of access into unstructured data that probably a couple of years ago wasn't even accessible, right? And I think I'm very excited for the function and to see where it's evolving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The traditional role of the value consultant, value engineer is that lower left-hand corner, kind of the business case factory. That's why there's a little factory picture there, dial up, here's the parameters I need, create a business case for me. And then it moved to the upper left, the enabler, where, now, hey, automation is available. Let's put this in a tool, let's deliver it out to the sellers. But a lot of times you then had to have skills in that lower right-hand corner that some groups were missing, some leaders were missing, which was then the evangelism. And the best groups were in the upper left, they had the enablement, but then also the lower right, and they were evangelizing out on a regular basis to sales, getting them on the phone, really promoting the heck out of it. And now we've got this kind of combination role in that upper right, the orchestrator, the value program orchestrator. And this is working not just with sales or single dimensionally, but now throughout the organization and throughout the customer life cycle. So good article on our insights page and the community page. So 4 archetypes, look that one up, and there's a link here when we share this that you can click on to kind of get that content. The value of value, Jonathan, there's no doubt, and I'm sure you've had a lot of customers that have been very successful with this over the years, that value delivers. I mean, when you get this right, it is one of the highest growth programs that you can absolutely implement.
Yeah. When that light bulb comes on, Tom, people recognize it makes a massive difference. We have one of our customers, Situ, they're based in the Nordics, large global retail software organization. It only came to light for one of the sales users of our software to drive one of the biggest deals of Q2 last year. The situation arose where there was a deal to be done with their customer, with the prospect. The majority of the board had gone on vacation. It was near kind of middle of June, end of June. People were heading off on vacation, and two or three of these board members were left, and this deal had to be done. And the remaining board members said, if you can prove or help us justify these numbers, we can approve the spend for your solution quickly. But you have to work with us and the necessary stakeholders to provide those metrics. So you'll have to work hard to get this thing done. So this sales guy from situ spent 24 hours at the desk nailing these numbers, talking with stakeholders within this customer. And they proved it. They justified it. They get all the paperwork done. The documentation was ready there for approval. And within 24 hours of that kind of being rubber stamped, they got the order. And it was one of the biggest deals they did in Q2. So it does work. And of course, you're trying to address many different decision makers, stakeholders who have different requirements in the organization. A sales director, CRO is not going to approve the improvement of sales by 50%. They might agree 1 or 2%. A warehouse manager is not going to say we're going to help manage our warehouse output by 75%. They might agree 10%, for instance. So all these different moving parts in that organizations have different budgets. They have different objectives and goals that you need to satisfy with a balanced business case. So I think avoiding, and in that case, it was that last one, accelerating sales cycle. That could have moved out to Q3, Q4, who knows? Guys coming back from vacation, we changed our mind. We've had a great time. We've got a suntan. And hey, do you know what? We want to go somewhere else with our money. So that was a great example of how that light came on, and he's churning things out for all these deals now proactively. He's not waiting for the customer to ask for the business case, doing it proactively. And I think that's the critical piece, doing it proactively. Yeah.
And Jonathan, you point out, B2B buying is a team sport now. 11 is the average number that Gartner has kind of hit on as the average right now in a typical enterprise level deal. So that consensus building, that appealing to the unique point of value that each of those stakeholders has is important. You also mentioned the collaboration and the consultation, which I think is essential. And the more the automation platform can not just produce a value hypothesis and the estimate up front, which we want that early, but then really support this customization, collaboration, validation with the customer, and making that easy is powerful. Max, in terms of value that your customers have received, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of a couple ones. I think on the data side, it's funny, we just had a couple of QBRs this week where we gathered some kind of key data around how do we drive win rates, acceleration of sales cycle, and the biggest one that stood out, we talked to a Sequoia Capital-backed company yesterday and talked a bit about the impact we had with their chief revenue officer. And our value team that we work with, they kind of gathered some of the numbers and realized that we actually increased their win rates for the self-service aspect of value by 20 percentage points, which has been incredible for the organization, and if actually impacted several millions of additional close-won revenue. I think that's on the data side. I think it proves that what Jonathan has said, what we're kind of trying to categorizing as well, is there's a lot of momentum if you look at the data, but I think the stories matter. And I think we have one story that we always like to share from a security company that we work with in the software space, and they had a CISO open up the business case, and the person played around with different numbers, tried to assess the value of different use cases, and actually came back to the seller and said, hey, I actually kind of used your product in the business case side to explore the value, and I did put everything almost to zero, and I still see the value now. And actually about the additional use case you explored that we didn't even talk about before. And I think that's the stories that I think Jonathan and I, we see again and again, right, in the category of value tooling, where there's those stories that are being told that come to you that are just fundamentally different than if you wouldn't have a value function in place, if you wouldn't have tooling in place that allows you to scale. It's when a customer actually participates and sees the value even before the sales rep maybe is trying to put it on their table. I think that's a great story about value.
Yeah.
And actually, Tom, sorry, just to add to your point, Max, I think that historically, a lot of customers believe that this engagement might take 4 weeks, 6 weeks, months, and bring in 20, 30 people, which they don't actually require, or they won't want that to happen. So I think, trying to formalize this in a more efficient manner and communicating that to the customer, I think is critical. It doesn't take us probably as long as you think, and we will get to an output quickly, is what you mentioned, Max. Yeah.
No one needs another project. Sales resists it. Customer success resists it. The customers absolutely resist it, right? So we have to make this as seamless as possible. Norman asked a question in the chat. For every 10% acceleration of value selling adoption, we calculated a 10% boost in revenue. What that means, Norman, is that we've got that low adoption rate, right? 19% pre-sales. Let's just look at pre-sales for now. If we can get that up to 29, so kind of close to a third of the sellers doing this on their deals, as opposed to 1 in 5, that would mean a 10% increase in growth for the organization. And, it's not easy to get a 10% boost in adoption. There's a lot of elements, from executive leadership to support to training to coaching to an automation platform to make it easy and, kind of sexy to engage with it. But if you're able to do that, it's one of the best investments and best payoffs, because where else are you going to be able to get a 10% boost in revenue? There aren't that many levers you can throw, and value selling is one of them. And so that's what that ultimately means. Now, we talked pre-sale a little bit in that example, but Gartner, they've got their chief sales officer, their sales leadership conference just this week. And to kick off the event, they released a press release that had their latest research. And what it showed was that the big focus is not on new pipeline acquisition, new customer acquisition. To no one's surprise, in tough times, it reverts back to your existing customers, making them happy, making them not regret, making them satisfied so they'll renew, and then more important, grow. And the amount of revenue you can get from a new customer compared to existing customers, it's less expensive, but not easy, because they're all looking to consolidate, replace. There's those initiatives underway. And what Gartner said was 2025, 2026 success is going to mean post-sale value. They mentioned realized value in this study. They mentioned that there's a realized value gap. And, hallelujah, I couldn't be happier that my old alma mater is now adopting this and promoting it, and rightfully so. It's really important.
Good job.
How can we, Max, improve value realization, get customer success to adopt, because they are lagging way behind sales in this? How do we become successful in this area?
Yeah, congrats, Tom. First of all, I think your impact it took a bit of time, but now I think they've seen what you've been preaching for I think a few years now. So it's good to see that on kind of a big stage at Gartner. Valuation starts with, first of all, understanding where do you deliver value to existing customers, right? That you can actually formulate. You can go back to your existing customers. You can ask them, where have you seen the value so far? Where are the gaps? Like, where are the delivery gaps that you've been noticing? And actually build narratives and stories around it that you can continuously use pre-sales and then post-sales. I think there are two things that I would love to emphasize. I think there's a big issue in pre-sales to post-sales handovers. Yes. When it comes to just aligning both teams in mutually understanding, what are we actually trying to deliver here for the customer? What are the benefits that we have associated ourselves with? And what's the expectation from a C-level executive that essentially is paying the money to come back to us in probably 8-9 months and ask, how's it been going, right? I think there's a lot of just friction between pre and post sales, where oftentimes there's no handover, there's no consistent process, how a business case even gets handed over to a different team. And I think that consistent transfer of knowledge needs to be the first thing that needs to be solved. And I think both teams need to participate. I think the best teams that are already starting to do value realization right, think about it less about a process, but more as a differentiator. If you are in a competitive deal and you are presenting value realization as a key method to your success on the adoption side as a vendor to your buyer, it can be a clear differentiator of saying, dear customer, we actually want to do this, and every 3 to 6 months we're going to look at the numbers, and we're going to see whether we actually realize the value, and we're going to keep both of us accountable, right? The buyer, the champions that need to do their work, but then also the vendor. And if that's not the case, and if there's no accountability on both parties, it will be incredibly difficult, and position it more as a differentiator to your success compared to the other vendors who might not even think about realization as a core part of their process. And I think that's where the best teams are already adopting it, and I think the buyers expecting it from the other side, and that then mutually leads to greater success and more upsells, cross sells, and of course a higher percentage of renewals. I think that's where we would see the differences and the evolvement of the function.
Yeah, positioning absolutely important. Jonathan, though, there's a difficulty in just implementing it, right? Getting customers to give you what they need, having customer success get that data, and then what do they do with it? So talk a little bit about that and kind of what you're seeing.
Yeah, I agree with what Max said. I think pre-sold business case is absolutely important. It's an imperative to get the value realization right. To pick up on your point, I think keeping this simplistic, I think the tracking and tracing of value in a customer success world has just become overwhelming. Marketing, sales, and customer success aren't joined up, and marketing and promoting high numbers, the sellers, value engineers promoting realistic numbers. Customer success, bless them, have got to then be handed over this scenario where they said, you agree to this, we can't deliver this. So I think where we're seeing value realization actually taking place, it's not often, but where it's taking place is where we've got 2 or 3 or 4 key metrics, right? Number of site clicks, has that increased? Number of hits on an email, has that increased in the world of marketing space for retail, for instance? Those just 3 or 4 mini insights, I think, have an incredible story to tell for the customer that's renewing or continuing with their service. And I think that's critical. Not to say we've got to collect 50 pieces of information, we've got to track and trace those. Let's lowball this. We don't have to hit the numbers out of the park with this. We don't need a home run, right? Or in the UK, we'd say a 6. Okay, we don't need to do that. We just need to little kind of get into the first, second, third base. And then we'll build that confidence to know that they are getting the value, but it's also being tracked, as Max says, professionally, and they're getting what they want.
Yeah. And that it's a part of, in our mind, like a shared value plan that's set up pre-sale that then flows through post-sale. And it's something that the customer understands, they work on, you work on, and it's all shared. I think keeping it simple is really important. We worked on a program where for Ping Identity, Vikas Mandata, a great value leader, and we really built a rather complex model that was similar to the pre-sale model. Like, hey, pre-sale, we get this value. Here's all the dimensions. Here's all the numbers. Post-sale, now we're going to validate that. Well, you want to have some of that kind of connective tissue, right? So you don't want to just sever it and start over in post-sale, but pre-sale is going to be too complex for post-sale as is. And so this kind of concept of simplicity, I think, is essential. Get it down to the few key metrics that everyone can agree to, that you've got pre-established, post-measurable, and then that can be easily quantified from that, and don't overdo it. The other thing is making sure that your storytelling, I think with your value realization, it's not the numbers, just like it isn't only the numbers pre-sale. It's not just the numbers post-sale. And I think it needs to be part of a story. And we promote this kind of GROWS concept of goals, reflection, outcomes, wins, and strategy. Again, look at that on the community so you can get it. We've got that outlined in an article. Just search for GROWS and you can kind of understand what the storytelling needs to look like post-sale. This is our second year of doing the value automation platform guide, and we had more fun this year than last year, which is always a good sign. There were 16 different providers. Many of them were established players that have been around for a while, a lot of experience, a lot of amazing success. There were also several newer players like Minoa, who did appear last year, but relatively new last year, who are now maturing. So really exciting times for me, being one of the early pioneers in this and like one of only 1 or 2 companies doing it. It's amazing to see 16 companies, and then there were several that we didn't even add to the guide that are kind of just launching as well. There's a funding, seed, Series A, coming into the space. What are you all seeing as trends? And Jonathan, I'll send this over to you first in the value automation marketplace and kind of the offering options. Are you equally excited?
Absolutely. Yeah, back in the early 2000s when we were going together on these opportunities, Tom, I clearly think we've got a changed environment now with
Yeah.
way more organizations coming into this and making this market bigger. And I think your efforts with April is beginning to build this market and make this bigger than it ever should be, because I think we're still lower down in the market level, and that needs to be built. And I think engagement, visibility, education is critical. I mentioned before when we spoke about your role in growing this marketplace. If you think about the bid management and proposal generation world, that world has got many suppliers, great suppliers in that marketplace.
Mhm.
Chorus Docs, Qvidian,
Yep.
Lupio, that
Yep.
they're all there fighting for some great business. And that association, the APMP, Association of Proposal Management Professionals, I got that right. Okay. Those guys 20 years ago, 25 years ago, were so low building the marketplace. And I see this as almost a replication of that growth. So with
Mhm.
Genius Drive and what you're doing is going to build that market and make this more visible, make it more of an imperative for sellers, customer success, project teams to drive the value. So yeah, but thumbs up from me on that. Got to be, and from
Thank you.
everybody as well, right?
Yeah, honored to just be a part of this community, which is definitely growing.
Yeah.
Max, what are you seeing? You're more new to this space, and I think that's exciting, seeing so many new organizations, kind of come to market.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Jonathan, right? I think we all have a responsibility to build the market further, to kind of evangelize what this is all about. I think initially I just talked to people that have been in the space for quite some time. I think historically, as Jonathan also outlined, you, Tom, as well, I think you've both been part of the journey. I think it's interesting how it continues to evolve, right? And initially it was focused on maybe the value teams. Now it's a value teams plus, right? Customer success, pre-sales, and it's been continuously evolving into something that's now even, I think, more collaborative, right? You think about how does a buyer need to be involved in the process of building business cases, but then also assuring value across the life cycle. And I think that the next wave, which I'm kind of excited about, is AI and value engineering. And I think that's where, of course, being in San Francisco, there's all the billboards around different AI solutions. Billboard yet with AI and value. So let's see when the category is kind of big enough that that's going to happen. But I think the trend is there, right? I think go-to-market tools are kind of now looking at the different life cycles of a company, top of funnel. You have the Gongs of this world that back in the days have also struggled to initially start off, right, and have people record meetings. It was not a thing that everybody believed in. And I think we're at a different time with value as well, where there's at least not as often the question anymore of like, should I even do value? It's more of a question of how do I do it? Which system should I get? Which partner should I work with? Like you guys, Tom and April and the entire team. And I think that's, we're going in the right direction. And I think all have to, including the people listening and watching, kind of push the category further to the next stage.
I think as well. And the value automation framework that we added, I think is a good help. It's kind of got an RFP structure to it. So that'll be helpful. And just click on that QR code to download if you haven't downloaded it yet. We look forward to you reading it and feedback. But what a great way to kind of get an overview of all 16 platforms. And we were able to review each one and get demos from you guys, which was absolutely fantastic. Dudley Nostrin, who I know is participating in the chat and on the session today, he was the main analyst on it as a value superstar. So couldn't thank him enough and the team enough, and the providers enough for giving us their time to really pull this together. Max, you mentioned AI. AI is in the water in San Francisco. It's a question that we get asked often. What role should AI play in the value practice and even broader in selling in general? What are you seeing as some of the great use cases and where you would look for second and third kind of for AI opportunities?
Right. I think there are a couple ones, right? I think, I mean, I saw the big news yesterday of the former chief design officer at Apple now going to. I think we've come to a time now where everybody talks about, and I think it's in the news almost every day. I think for specifically value and go to market overall, I think AI has an incredible opportunity to cut out the noise. I think when value is, and Jonathan, you mentioned this earlier, I think it kind of brings you down to the rational of investment. And I think when value is being applied at scale to all the different team members, it helps to cut out the noise and actually focus on the conversations that matter for the customer, which is, what am I actually getting out of this? How long does it take me to get adoption? And AI can help you facilitate those conversations and deliver more of the right information to you at hand, whether you are a value engineer, a CSM, an SE, or an AE. I think all of those different roles will have the ability with AI now to become smarter, to have the ability to become a subject matter expert in whichever industry they are targeting. And that's an incredible opportunity that I think, just like a couple of years ago, if before this world that we're in now, I think it wouldn't have been possible to access all that information and make you smarter as you navigate a conversation with a customer. And I think it's an incredible time. I think it's this like true collaboration between agentic systems and the human in actually delivering the best value to customers and cutting the noise and actually focusing on what's relevant to both sides and making sure that it's built on a good partnership.
Absolutely. Jonathan?
Yeah, I agree, Max. I think with the plethora of tools that we have available to us, it makes our lives much easier as business people, doesn't it, to understand how we communicate. And I think there needs to be a general expectation that when we're using AI with our value tools, that it's not always going to be absolutely accurate. Let's not forget that when we talk about business cases, and this is an education piece, we're looking forward. We're looking forward. This is about decisions and about what might come in the future. That needs negotiation. It needs character. It needs somebody to assume stuff. And I think AI is going to help us do that, but it delivers it with speed and an element of credibility. So if we are going to lead our sales pitches, opportunities with value, they've got to be value led. And if we start them with value, I think there's going to be an undertone, an underpinning of value throughout that sales cycle. And I think using AI is going to help us refine value hypothesis, get to the nub of the problem. That is, what is their problem? What's their challenge we're trying to uncover here? And can we put some quantification to that? We're still in the early stages of AI, as we all know, but I think it's getting better. I think if we start to augment that with other metrics or other sources, I think we'll become more accurate, and it'll then, I think, be clearer to people that actually we can start with this and we can lead with it and end with it as well as we become more mature using it throughout all of our collateral and sales experience.
Yeah. I'm still seeing it not be accurate enough, but it has dramatically improved over the past 6 months.
It has.
And so when you project forward, definitely seeing some of those improvements. I do believe that agentic and the ability for us to be part of a chain does have an incredible amount of promise. So you could easily see an agent calling us as an automation platform with some data, us providing some numbers back that get combining with other agent results. And, the power I think can be there. I don't see it as replacing, the need for a platform. But I see the platforms as being an integral part of the AI. And I'd encourage teams not to just go and say, okay, well, the AI can get us close enough on a value hypothesis or close enough on this. I don't think that's the case. I don't think it's going to be the case for some time. So I would not hold off on investing in an automation platform for the hopes that you can just query an AI and it'll come up with a quote unquote business case for you. So definitely a little bit of kind of my analyst opinion there. Q&A, sorry, it looks like the QR code has expired. I probably should have tested it. I grabbed it from a presentation that we didn't use too long ago, so I didn't know it had an expiry. So what I'll do is I'll stop sharing and basically provide up that link in the chat. What I'd love to do is open it up. I know Marianne has been monitoring the chat for questions, and I'd love it, Marianne, if you can come off mute. I'm hoping you can do that. And if you can provide us with some questions, and be free to choose Max or Jonathan or myself to answer to get us started.
Hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, we can hear you, Marianne.
Excellent. One question that came in fairly early was, among pre-sales, sales, and post-sales teams, where and how do you position the value consultancy team? Like, who should bring and engage them into the opportunity? And at what point in the sales cycle should that happen?
I can take that, Tom. Or yeah. So I think it's a great question. And I think to answer that, I think I'll reflect on the kind of, I mentioned before, the bid management and proposal world. They've learned a lot over the past 20 years, and I think it can have a lot of similarity with that particular question and where they're brought in. And I think it really looks on size of deal, logo, and whether you want to be self-serving. So, for those low to mid volume deals, you clearly have a salesperson joined up with a bid manager. That could be a salesperson self-serving on value tools, being supported by a junior value engineer. Going further down the pipeline, when you've got bigger deals, you're clearly going to have a value engineer, value director working with that salesperson. As we go down to the bigger deals, that's where that value consultant, will be acting alongside the salesperson, but primarily be delivered by that value consultant. So I think it's all about on a case-by-case basis, but it might be down to, hey, you have a bid manager, a bid director, and you have a senior bid director. Same with value engineering, because there are always going to be deals where that salesperson's got to self-serve on a bid. They have to self-serve on building a business case. So, and I think that's the way that the world is changing now, with organizations having your value consultants, because they absolutely have an important place in the organization to drive that education, but also to talk with some real big deals. So you get some differentiation and credibility as well.
Yeah, no, great response. Thank you. Max, there was a lot of dialogue going back and forth around personas, and the fact that salespeople have a difficult time getting by the technical buyer. And then there was some question about, well, are companies moving away from those technical specifications and more towards business outcomes? What are you seeing in terms of the use of value automation tools and helping them get through that?
Such a great question. Thanks, Marianne, for answer. Basically bringing it up. I think technical validation has a good reason to exist, right? I think it's like whenever there's functionality differences between different vendors, you as a buyer, you want to evaluate where are the technical differences, right? And you want to understand how does that apply back to the use case and the problem you're trying to solve. I think that will never go away. And I think there's a reason why there's a hierarchy of business, right? And certain people, they want to also understand the kind of concepts and the understanding of the different functionalities before they make a recommendation to somebody putting budget aside, right? And you want to make sure that you understand the functionality differences. And I think that will always exist. I think the biggest problem that we're seeing is that a lot of organizations are running into technical POCs without understanding the business value. And I think that's where a lot of time is invested by solution architects, solution engineers that are investing quite a lot of time into better environments for technical POVs. But then you work with them, your customer, for 2-3 months, and then at some point you want to have the business conversation, and you lead up to an executive buyer, and the person says, "Hey, I've never heard that this project is even running," right? So that's, I think, the bigger problem of like translating early enough and multi-threading with the business case that you're building before the POC is even starting, and then leveraging that for a business conversation up the value chain and up the ladder. And I think that's where a lot of just gaps arise, where sellers don't have anything at hand that they can now use in order to multi-thread and go to different people. And I think business value and the value case actually allows you to do that, because you have something at hand that you can multi-thread with and share with other people before you invest more internal time on a proof of concept, for example.
Yeah, that's a great point. It actually leads into another question, which was, how do you secure executive leadership and executive sponsorship when it's not all the way there yet?
Yeah.
Good.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I think you then talk about champions and those champions being your executive sponsor. And I think that also comes to, I think the fifth or sixth slide around being a reasonable, trustworthy business case. So I think we have to de-risk every conversation around the value, and that's how you get your sponsorship and executive sponsor on this. If there's a business need, an objective, a goal, a business imperative, okay, has to be underpinned by technology. Going back to Max's question, has to be underpinned by a business imperative that's delivered by some form of technology. So it has to be value led, but de-risked at every corner, every conversation that you have. And that allows us then to then move up from that, doesn't it? It allows us to say, well, okay, we agreed this much, but if we need to show more, we can always go up. And I think that's critical to get their buy-in and to get the executives to buy into that as well. Yeah.
Max, I think you wanted to add on that.
No, I think it's perfectly. I think well summarized. I think the executive buyer has a reason to play at the right time, but I think a lot of sellers, and I think that's where value engineers can encourage them, are missing out on the opportunity to multi-threat with the business value and actually do the conversations that are needed. And I think that's where the best teams are leveraging that basically every single day, right? And they're trying to build templates and workarounds on actually using business value in those conversations. So that's just, I think, that to Jonathan's point.
Yeah,
Sales leadership's got to get in there and make sure that that executive buyer is engaged, that the strategic alignment is there before that POC is done, and that there is that business case, at least a value hypothesis going into the POC. And that's where product-led growth can't be by itself. You really need this value-led motion, and the executive, the economic buyer need to be engaged and identified. And too often we see when we get, maybe we're invited in late, we do an inspection and immediately we're seeing like it's single threaded within the account. It's mostly technical folks. There might be an economic buyer that's been identified, like, oh, who needs to sign this off, but they haven't been engaged and we don't know what makes them tick.
Yeah.
And so those are deals that we know are going to stall out and often do out of POCs.
Yeah. We see that as a pretty obvious, risk area. Another question came in that says, what do you say to sales directors and leaderships, I'm assuming within the sales organization, who view value engagements as risky? We've all heard, oh no, value will slow down this speedy process I've got going, and will also default to not doing one unless the customer didn't ask for it, so we don't need to do that.
Yeah.
We've
Max?
all heard that repeatedly. Max, you want to take that to start with?
I mean, I always say at some point, the filter will get wider and wider, right? And you will lose more opportunities or basically disqualify too late in the funnel because you actually didn't have the conversation with the customer early enough. And then at the latest point, and I think that's where maybe sales directors directly are not impacted by their KPIs, but the leadership team will be, who's kind of leading sales. It will come down to the renewal and to the conversation at some point, maybe 8 months in, where every organization right now is struggling with net retention rates and GR, right? Of how do you then bring that back to your sales conversation? It's about qualifying better whether you can actually deliver value. And it's not just about, and I think that's still a little bit of the perception in the market. It's about the ROI number that you put in front of a customer. It's not about that, right? But it's about mutually understanding where you're going to deliver value and what are the pockets of use cases where you're best at. And if you don't clarify that together with the buyer, you will probably run into some issues at latest, probably like 8-9 months into the partnership, if not even earlier. So that's where it just like, it comes back to the sellers, and it comes back, I think, to the first question you brought up, Tom, of where's the overall, right? We do see growth stall at basically probably the lowest in 10 years. One of the reasons is probably because of that, because there isn't enough business value conversation across the funnel. And I think that's where the opportunity lies to actually drive change now.
Jonathan, you want to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, your typical buyer doesn't have the skills. They don't have the time. It's not their job. So it's incumbent upon a seller to differentiate now, because, they want to move that decision down the line. Okay. They want to kick the ball forwards. They want to make a decision quickly to help them do that. And I think I mentioned before, historically, where you've had, mammoth business cases going in with too much detail, and it just slows the whole process down. Well, how about being more agile? How about actually talking with your customer, which is a strange thing, isn't it? But if actually you talk to them sometimes and you respond with something which is credible and be credible, they might actually react. And I think previously people have had their fingers burnt overdoing probably too much early on. And actually they think it slowed that process down, and it's not a salesperson's job. It coming from sales, you probably can imagine that. Coming from sales for 27 years, it can slow the process down. Of course it can. But then the bigger gains are for the longer term, right? So give it a try.
Tom has a very favorite story about Formula One driving. Can you
Yeah,
share
my
that with us?
performance driving school days, I was a driving instructor, and we did have a saying that Skip Barber School taught, and others: go in slow to come out fast. When there's a tight corner, especially when you're a young, nascent driver, you get out on the track the first time, you want to bomb in that corner. You want to go in fast and then kind of wrestle the car around, and you're all discombobulated, and then you're coming out and you're not gaining traction. Instead, there's an anatomy to that corner. Go in straight, brake in a straight line, get the car under control, kind of ease off of the brake onto the gas to kind of get it turned. And you do go in a little bit slower, but your exit speed is what's most important. And I think that's, Jonathan, what you were saying, which is, it might add a little step here. It might add a little bit to this conversation or that conversation, but you're going to accelerate out faster. You're going to be much more orderly through that process. And I think that's what we need. Go in slow to come out fast. And we need to teach our directors that, and the team.
Absolutely. Great analogy. I'm going to use that, Tom. Thank you.
You got it.
I use it all the time now.
It's in one of the driving performance books behind me. Guys, we're at the top of the hour. I can't thank you enough. Max Elster, Jonathan Keighley, Max Elster with Minoa, Jonathan Keighley, Shark Finesse. It was absolutely a pleasure to interview the two of you, to get your experience out there, your expertise out there. Definitely check out both of those solutions, as well as the Automation Buyer's Guide. Marion, thank you so much for compiling the questions and monitoring the chat and bringing that up to us as well. Can't thank you enough.
My pleasure.
Keep sharing and growing together, everyone, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you, Marianne. Cheers, Max. Thank you.
Hey, Jonathan, can you stay on for a second?
I can. Yep. Go for it.
I have to ask you a question.